Why busy gyms still lose money? Picture it. January 2nd. The parking lot is full. The lobby is packed. Every treadmill has a line. You walk into your local gym and think, these people are printing money. You're wrong. Statistically dead wrong. That gym you just walked into, there's a real chance it's losing money right now at the exact moment it looks the busiest it's ever going to look all year. And by March, when half those New Year's crowds vanish and the machines go quiet again, the gym will actually start looking healthier on paper. Not worse. Better. That's the paradox nobody tells you about the fitness industry. A packed gym isn't a sign of success. Sometimes it's a warning sign. So what's actually going on behind those mirrored walls and motivational posters? Let's break down the real economics of owning a gym, because it's nothing like what you think. Here's the fantasy, and it's a genuinely seductive one. You open a gym. People pay you every single month, forever, whether they show up or not. No inventory to manage, no product to ship, just a building full of equipment you bought once, and a recurring subscription that hits your bank account on autopilot. It sounds like the closest thing to a money printing machine that exists in the physical world. And on a macro level, the story backs that up. The fitness industry is enormous. In the US alone, gym memberships hit a record 77 million people in 2024, nearly 1 in 4 Americans. That's not a niche hobby. That's a mainstream, trillion-dollar adjacent global industry, and it keeps growing every single year. So here's the illusion breaking in real time. Despite that massive scale, despite tens of millions of people willingly handing over their credit card every month, the average traditional gym operates on a profit margin of just 10 to 15%. Full-service health clubs, the kind with pools and basketball courts and childcare rooms, often sit even lower, down around 8 to 12%. Compare that to something like a software company running at 60, 70, 80% margins on a subscription model, and suddenly the picture looks a lot less glamorous, which raises the obvious question. If millions of people are paying every month, forever, why is the actual profit margin so thin? Let's start with what it actually costs to open the doors in the first place. A serious full-service gym, the kind people picture when they imagine gym ownership, isn't cheap to build. You're looking at anywhere from a few $100,000 for a small boutique studio, up past $1 million or $2 million for a full-scale facility with cardio floors, free weight sections, group class studios, and locker rooms. Commercial-grade treadmills alone can run several $1,000s each, and you need dozens of them. Strength machines, cable systems, flooring, HVAC systems powerful enough to cool a room full of sweating bodies, all of it adds up before a single member ever walks through the door. Then there's the lease. Gyms need square footage, and square footage in a decent location isn't cheap. Add build-out costs, permits, insurance, and staff hired months before you've generated $1 of revenue, and you can understand why so many gym owners are underwater before their grand opening banner even comes down. But the sticker shock of opening day isn't actually where most gyms get quietly bled dry. That happens after the doors open, in costs that never show up on the glossy business plan. Rent and staff alone eat up roughly 70% of a gym's total operating costs, 70% before you've paid for a single dumbbell replacement or a broken treadmill belt. And gyms are open long hours, often 18 to 24 hours a day, which means paying for electricity, water, cleaning staff, and front desk coverage across a schedule most retail businesses would never touch. Equipment doesn't just sit there looking impressive either. It breaks, constantly. Treadmill belts wear out, cable machines fray, air conditioning units strain under the load of hundreds of overheated bodies moving through the space every single day. Maintenance isn't an occasional expense, it's a permanent line item, and it never goes down. Then there's the cost most people never think about at all: member churn. The industry average annual retention rate sits around 66%, which means roughly 1 in 3 members cancels every single year. That's not a rounding error. That's a business constantly running just to replace the customers it's already losing, spending marketing dollars, sign-up promotions, and staff time reacquiring people who were already paying customers 12 months earlier. So between rent, staff, equipment decay, and a customer base that quietly evaporates a third at a time, you start to see why that recurring revenue dream doesn't translate into recurring profit nearly as cleanly as it seems. Now here's where it gets genuinely strange, and where the real business model of the fitness industry reveals itself. Remember that crowded gym from the opening scene? The one that looked like it was thriving? Here's the uncomfortable truth. If every single member of most gyms actually showed up at the same time, the business would collapse. Literally. There isn't enough floor space, enough equipment, or enough parking to handle it. Take one of the most successful gym chains in the country as an example. It's built an entire business model, publicly, openly, around members who barely show up. A single location might carry several thousand members while only having physical capacity for a few hundred people at once. That's not a flaw in the plan. That is the plan. Membership fees stay low, sometimes as little as $10 a month, specifically because the company knows the majority of people who sign up in January will be attending sporadically, or not at all, by summer. This is sometimes called the gray revenue model in the fitness industry. money collected from members who never use the service. And according to industry data, the numbers are staggering. Estimates suggest that a majority of gym memberships go largely or entirely unused across a given month. The gym isn't secretly hoping you'll show up and get your money's worth. In the low-cost membership tier, it's quietly hoping you won't. Because think about the math from the owner's side. A member who shows up 5 times a week uses electricity, wears down equipment, needs staff supervision, and occupies space that could theoretically hold another paying customer. A member who pays every month and never appears costs the gym almost nothing beyond the price of processing that transaction. In the most literal sense, the ideal customer for a low-cost gym isn't the dedicated gym rat. It's the well-intentioned person who signs up in January, means every word of their New Year's resolution, and quietly stops coming by February. That's not a cynical accident. That's the entire architecture of the low-cost fitness model, built deliberately around human behavior that's remarkably predictable year after year. Which is exactly why a packed gym in January can be dangerously misleading, both for the owner and for anyone watching from the outside. A gym that's suddenly overwhelmed with new signups has to burn cash reacting to a surge that everyone in the industry already knows is temporary. More staff on the floor to keep up with demand, more wear and tear on machines running at maximum capacity. Longer lines that frustrate existing members enough to make them reconsider renewing. The very success that looks impressive from the parking lot can actually be squeezing margins in real time, because that flood of new members isn't matched by a flood of new long-term revenue. Most of them won't be back by spring. Meanwhile, the gyms that actually make consistent money tend to look almost boring by comparison. Steady, predictable attendance. A membership base that's been retained for years rather than freshly acquired. Costs that don't spike unpredictably because the owner isn't scrambling to handle a seasonal wave they can't plan around. This tension between looking successful and being profitable came to a brutal head in 2020, when the entire industry's business model was tested at once. When gyms across the country were forced to shut their doors, the flaw in the traditional model became impossible to ignore. Without members physically walking in, without that seasonal churn cycle refreshing the customer base, the underlying debt and fixed costs that many gym chains had quietly built up for years suddenly had nowhere to hide. 24-Hour Fitness, one of the largest gym chains in the country, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in June 2020. Before the filing, the company operated 445 locations across 14 states with over 19,000 employees. The chain permanently closed more than 100 clubs and eliminated $1.2 billion in debt during its restructuring. When it finally emerged from bankruptcy that December, it did so with fewer than 300 locations remaining, a fraction of what it once had. This wasn't simply a story about a pandemic closing a business. It was a story about a business model that had been running on thin margins and heavy debt long before anyone had heard the word lockdown. The pandemic didn't create the vulnerability. It exposed one that had been quietly built into the industry for years. A structure that depended on constant new enrollment covering the gap left by constant cancellation, and on members paying for a service many of them would rarely use. So where does that leave the fitness industry today? Not dead, certainly. Not even struggling, by most measures. But it does leave it as an industry that rewards a very specific kind of discipline, one that has almost nothing to do with fitness itself. The gyms thriving right now aren't necessarily the busiest ones. They're the ones with the tightest grip on retention, the ones that understand their real product was never the equipment on the floor. Boutique fitness studios with their higher price points and smaller, more engaged member bases now regularly post profit margins of 20 to 40%, often double or triple what a traditional big box gym can manage. Why? Because they've built a business around people who actually show up rather than one that quietly depends on people who don't. And that's the real twist sitting underneath this entire industry. A gym doesn't fail because too few people join. It fails, or barely survives, because of a strange, uncomfortable dependency on human behavior that most owners never say out loud. The business needs you to want to change badly enough to sign the contract, and forget about it comfortably enough to keep paying without asking for your money back. Every January, millions of people walk through those doors with real intentions, genuinely wanting a different version of themselves by summer. And in a strange, almost poetic twist, the industry's survival has quietly depended for years on exactly how often those good intentions don't survive the winter.